When I first went to build out the onboarding program, I went and did interviews everywhere. And I'm like, what needs to be in this onboarding program? And I just had this laundry list of like 100 things. I was trying to build almost like the perfect onboarding program. And I obsessed over it to a point nothing would get done. And I realized, wait a minute, I just need to start with the bare minimum. And so I had to flip how I've always built things to go to the field. Instead of it being this perfectionist process, it was something's better than nothing. And over time, if you can build the tugboat, it becomes the cruise ship and that world-class onboarding program. And so you start little by little.
After starting her career in sales at iHeartMedia, Lish Barber fell into a sales operations role overnight. She spent the next few years building sales enablement programs for iHeartMedia's thousands of sales reps across 150 markets. And since then, she's led revenue enablement at Algolia, Lattice, and Sigma Computing. Welcome to Grow and Tell, the show where revenue leaders tell the growth stories behind successful companies. I'm your host, Alex Krakoff.
Grow and tell, grow and tell.
In today's episode, Lish and I explored what it takes to build great sales enablement programs for technical products. We talked about how to balance educating reps about product versus process, what goes into a great sales kickoff, where sales enablement sits on a cross-functional team, and what tools should be in every enablement tech stack. I loved her take on how sales enablement is like doing sales within a business. One quick ask before we get into our conversation. If you like the show, please hit subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps get our show in front of more people. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. So you started your career at iHeartMedia as a seller and then eventually transitioned into a sales ops role. Can you kind of share the story of your career and how you kind of moved into sales operations?
Yeah, I love this question. So I find like enablement people and like ops people, you kind of fall into your job some way or another. Like it's not like you can just go straight into enablement. And so I was selling, and basically one day the regional president, who was over like 10 markets, comes in to do a market visit. And I was really frustrated because I was like doing something in Salesforce. It was going really slow. And I'm like, why are we doing it this way? And why isn't anyone showing us how to do this in a better way? And so I just called him. I'm like, hey, Mike, like, can you just like, can we have someone that does this for us so like we can onboard people faster? And he was like, well, why don't you build a video? Like figure it out, go build a video, and then like I'll share it with all of the AEs. And I was like, okay. So I did it that afternoon. And I come into work the next day, and my local boss at the time, he goes, hey, I was having breakfast with your new best friend. And I was like, oh, who's that? And he was like, Mike. And you got a new job. And I was like, wait, what? And so I literally fell into it out of frustration. But it turned out to be a really, really fun opportunity. And so I was just given lots of problems and had to think about how would I solve those problems with 100 AEs within our region.
It's an amazing story of just you being so proactive and stepping up to solve a problem. All right, so you get this job, and like, what do you do next? Because you've never been in sales enablement before. You've been a seller. Like, did you have someone kind of telling you what you should do, or how did you sort of think about kind of that next step?
Honestly, I kept getting problems. So the first problem we had is we had like our local market sellers, and then we had like local agencies that would send us these orders, and they would be like hundreds upon hundreds of orders coming in daily to these 10 markets. And the first problem was like, how do we just get these orders into a system? They would come in through fax or email. Like there was no like eloquent system for these to get put into our like order entry system in Salesforce. And so like he basically would just give me these problems, and I'd have to come in with like, how would I operationalize it? How would I build this into a process that could scale? And so I had no idea what I was doing. I would graze my knees at every single moment and like would hit a hurdle, and I'd be like, I don't know how to solve this. I'm going to go talk to some people that do. And so it was just that. So I just kept on getting more problems. There was like our first sales kickoff. I'd never spoken in front of a room of 100 people before. Like I just kept getting those kind of opportunities and would figure it out.
It's amazing. I love the story of orders coming in over fax. Like I'm trying to build CPQ software right now, and it's like, oh my God, that must have been so, what a different time and era I can imagine.
Radio,
yeah.
It's old school, right?
Yeah. Too funny. And so iHeartMedia is like a pretty big company. Like, can you, like, what does sales enablement look like at scale, especially as you kind of got ramped into this role? I mean, how many AEs were you supporting? What did this kind of operation look like?
Yeah, so the first role that I started in was a regional role. And so that was supporting 100 AEs. And then like any company, reorgs happen. And I found myself being like part of 3 regions, and my role didn't really make sense at the time. And I was really grateful because someone advocated that I should join the corporate team. And so I started doing what I've been doing at the regional level for the entire company for the local sellers. So there was 1,600 AEs. And this new corporate sales ops enablement team were basically part of this modernization of our tech stack, of how we were actually going to go to market. So iHeartMedia was actually Clear Channel before that. And iHeartRadio was just like an app that was built on top of it. And then the entire company rebranded. And so we went from people that have been selling radio advertisements for like 30 years, now needing to learn how to use Salesforce for the first time in their career, or needing to learn how to use like a new application for emailing. And so there was just like lots of new technology being brought into the business, and like a brand new way of managing your pipeline that a lot of these sellers have never been exposed to before. So a lot of my training was around like sales process, teaching the sales leaders how to use new reporting and dashboards to manage their business. And so it was a lot of just going to lots of different markets and doing the same roadshow again and again and again.
Very cool. I did not realize Clear Channel and iHeartMedia were like the same company.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. Big company. And so then what does it look like? So you're at this corporate office, and then like, how did you get people at these regional offices to actually kind of, I don't know, follow like what you're saying? Like, did you have champions in each office? Like, how did you hold everybody sort of accountable? Because that must be hard, like the corporate regional dynamic, and you're not sitting next to them. Like, how do you sort of think about that?
And who am I to tell these like sales managers that have been running their markets for years and years and years, like decades, how to do their job in a different way? And so like, it was just selling internally. It was basically what I was tasked to do. And so it's going in, hearing their pains, doing discovery, and then being like, well, hey, do you realize that you can do it this way? And this would actually make it easier for you and faster and more efficient and more effective. And so it was just listening and then showing them, hey, this can actually be done in an easier way. It's not as complicated as you might be perceiving that it is. And so that's really what I do, is relationship building and going in and listening and training.
I love that framework of like sales enablement is somewhat just like internal selling and convincing and showing the value and understanding the pain points and selling it back to them. It's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Oh my God. I usually say enablement is like a business inside a business, because you're doing the sales part, right? You're listening, you're doing discovery, you're scoping, but then you're also having to be the product. You're building the solution with the customer. You're like co-designing with your sales leaders. And then you're kind of the marketer at the end, because you got to like market it back. You got to sell it back and then track the adoption of what you've built. So it's a business inside a business.
I love that. And so it sounds like you actually went to like, I think it was over 50 offices to actually hold people accountable and do sales trainings. Like, what did that look like? Yeah,
it was crazy. I could go to it. We basically would pick a different market every week that I would go and visit, and go listen to the problems they were having, and then showcase these like new tools that they had to make their lives easier. And over time, I would meet different people in those offices that would become my champions. And so I got to create like a new like group of a role called the Regional Sales Operations Leads. So over time, as more changes came out, I had a person in each market that I could just give kind of like a rollout kit to, that could then go and deliver that message and that training to the field.
Gotcha. It's really cool to hear this, because every company I've worked at has been way smaller than iHeartMedia. And so it's interesting to hear kind of like the different levels of sales enablement, as opposed to just one person, one office kind of running all of it. You had to like work through different people within the organization. It's just interesting to kind of hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a lot of the same for a longer amount of time. You don't make as many changes as fast as you would in SaaS, because, those changes, like, it takes a lot longer at scale. So it's a lot of just like repeat until you've built that habit and that muscle across the entire org.
But then after iHeartMedia, you eventually did join a SaaS company, Algolia. And like, I think you joined like right in the crazy hyperscale mode, which must have been very different environment than iHeartMedia. Can you talk a little bit about like why you joined Algolia and what was the company kind of like at the time?
Yeah, of course. So Algolia was kind of like my underdog story. I knew at iHeartMedia I was falling in love with technology and SaaS in particular, and I just wanted to be a part of it. And so I moved out to San Francisco. I applied for all of these jobs in either ops or enablement. And I kept getting the same thing, like, no, you've never worked in tech before. Like, no, sorry, this is too technical for you. You won't get it. And then I landed this gig at Algolia, and I like have to say a huge thank you to like Anne Charlotte for believing in me and Jean-Louis Baffier for believing in me and like letting me try to do enablement at a tech company for the first time. Because it was the most technical product you could join. I didn't even know what an API was before I joined the company. Learned that really quickly. But it was such a fun like era of the company because, you know, it had had this amazing PLG start, and it was like we'd had all of this pipeline. And over the time that I was there, we really had to start to build for the first time a really strong outbound motion to start to hit the newer targets that were put upon us. So it was a fascinating time to join the company. And also I had never, while I'd done stuff at scale, I had never done it across a global organization where like 50% of people were in EMEA. And so it was just a fantastic opportunity to cut my teeth and learn how to do it at scale.
And so what was that first, you mentioned like outbound was kind of like your first, program you worked on. Like, what did that look like? Were you helping them come up with messaging? Was it more tooling? How did you sort of think about kind of giving people this like outbound playbook that they could run with?
Yeah, it was a lot of trial and error. Like, we hadn't really ever done like personalized. It was a lot of spray and pray at the time. And so it was like, okay, like, can we use intent? And how does that help us? How do we change our messaging as a result? And we just started to build out all of these different go-to-market plays with PMM. So it would be like, we have these amazing use cases we're starting to see in a very specific vertical, like pharmaceuticals. You can imagine searching for vitamins and all of those different medicines, and the search, if it's not great, you have a terrible experience because you don't find what you're looking for. And we solved that problem. And so like we would have like these like vertical plays that we would build into this motion. We'd have a hypothesis of what our TAM was, and then we'd go and see if our hypothesis worked with this play. And so it was a lot of like a science experiment, for lack of a better term.
Very cool. And it's funny. I mean, I'm still doing the same sort of outbound plays right now for Doc. Like, it's like a lot has changed, and some things never have changed, in SaaS. But I guess, yeah, now we have a lot more AI and technology, I guess, to make it a little bit even more personalized.
Yeah, exactly.
And so Algolia was scaling super fast. And so I imagine sales onboarding and just ramping new sales reps must have been a very key initiative for the sales enablement team. How did you sort of think about building out Algolia's sales onboarding program?
This was a really good, like, early learning for me. So, when I first went to build out the onboarding program, I went and did interviews everywhere, and I'm like, what needs to be in this onboarding program? And I just had this laundry list of like 100 things. And, I was trying to build almost like the perfect onboarding program, and I obsessed over it to a point that like nothing would get done. And I realized, wait a minute, like I just need to start with the bare minimum. And so I had to flip my whole, like how I've always built things to go to the field. Instead of it being this perfectionist process, it was something's better than nothing. And over time, that tugboat, if you can build the tugboat, it becomes the cruise ship and that world-class onboarding program. And so you start little by little. What's the most important thing they need to know in week one? They need to know why they joined the company, what the problem is that you're solving, and who cares about that problem. And so like I just started to build it in that kind of form. So like why we would have people like onboarding on week one. Some of my team was building week 2, and then like we'd put them through week 2. And so we were literally building it as people were coming on board. And then over time we'd go, well, this was missing from that cohort, so we're going to go and build that next. And so it became a really awesome onboarding process just through constant iteration.
And how do you think about like the curriculum of an onboarding program? Like, what are you doing in week 1 versus week 2 versus week 3? Like, how do you sort of think about kind of ramping reps and slowly introducing them to, the new company, new product, all those things?
Such a good question. I think it's a misnomer to think that you can just squeeze everything into like 6 weeks and like they're ready to go. So, I started to think about, what do I need to push that like I really need to know like that they can talk about it and like make them care about it because it's going to help them. And I think about the outcomes of what we expect during a onboarding program. So like if we want sellers to be prospecting by week 3, what are all of the things that they need to know to be able to do that effectively? And so like I'll focus the content towards that milestone. And then like the other piece is what are the things that like when you need to know how to make a recipe, you just need to know where to go to look it up and follow the instructions. And there's a lot of stuff like that we do in our day-to-day. Like people don't need to learn about building a quote in the first 2 weeks, right? And like building a quote could probably just be like a list of instructions. Click here, then click here. And so I don't really need to do like a full live training for that. I just need to know that when they've got their opportunity and they're building that quote for the first time, it's there and they know where to find it. And so a lot of what I looked at when we're building onboarding programs is what do I have to push and what can be a pull resource that they just need to know exists. And that's how I've continued to build onboarding programs now at all of the companies I've worked at.
Yeah, and you've led sales enablement now at 2 very technical products, Algolia, and then now you're at Sigma Computing. Like when you're thinking of sales training or onboarding curriculum, like how do you think about that balance of product versus process? Are you teaching, it must be really hard. Salespeople don't know all the technical API stuff. And so do they need to get super educated on that? Or are you more teaching them Sandler and Medic and here's how you do prospecting and all that? Like, how do you think about that balance?
Yeah, it's a tough balance to strike, right? I don't think like no seller is ever going to feel amazingly confident like in the first few weeks of a technical product. I think that takes time. What I've tended to do with like a very technical product is like focus on the problem we solve. What does that pain look like? How do you just do discovery to find that pain? And what's the result of not solving that pain? What does that look like? And then what does that ideal state look like? So it's more methodology based for them to identify the pain and the problem and then show them how they can talk about how we solve it. I would say like that's why we also have SEs, our wonderful solution engineers. They can know all of the technical deep dive of the product. And so like when I'm focusing on sales onboarding, it's really about the problem we solve and how we solve it and who cares about that problem.
And when you think about building these onboarding programs, there's different types of sellers, right? There's your enterprise AE, mid-market, SMB, BDR, SDR, whatever you call it. Like, how do you think about the curriculum for each of those different cohorts of people? Because there's different maturity levels of sellers there, but then there's also similarities, right? It's the same product they're all trying to sell. So how do you think about kind of building that onboarding program across all those different seller personas?
It's funny. I've done it in different ways. I've always found, though, with enterprise sales teams, like as much tenure as they've got, a lot of time it's just going back to basics, right? Like making sure they know how to run that first call and they know what good discovery looks like. I think like the differences and the nuances happen with an SMB, the motion might be like so much different because like for Sigma, for example, our velocity motion, we're talking to companies where they're building like their data stack for the first time. And so like that sale looks very different from an enterprise that's been using Tableau or, another BI tool for years. And so like the motions are different. And so it's more about not necessarily like how to teach the product differently, but like what does the problem look like that's different in the segment and anchor on that.
Yeah, makes sense. I think like in terms of, I think about it always in terms of like doc perspective. It's like when we're talking to founders and startups, it's like they're still building out their sales process for the first time. So I'm like helping them think through like, what is that? What is even goes in a pitch deck or just film one demo video. And then I talk to like, a big public company. It's like, no, we have 1,000 demo videos for all of our different SKUs and we got to organize that. And it's like radically different problems and honestly different products we got to build to kind of solve those problems. So yeah, I don't know, your answer resonated with me a lot.
Yeah. Sure.
How do you think about like, do you try and push people to get on the phone really quickly and talk to customers and just to send out emails like, or do you wait until they're fully ramped, or is it different flavors in onboarding? How do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's all dependent on how the capacity model and the ramp and their quota is designed, like their ramped quota. Like I want them to be successful. I want them to get paid. And so I think it really, really does depend on the design of their plan and when we're expecting them to be at 100%. So onboarding can change drastically depending on that.
And what's the manager's role in all this? Because the sales enablement person is like leading the trainings and kind of building that curriculum. But then obviously all these people have managers as well. And so what's the relationship between sales enablement and kind of the person's manager? Because I assume the manager kind of has to like reinforce the learnings and hold them accountable. And yeah, how do you think about that?
Yeah. So like what we do is we have kind of like this accountability task thing. Here's what they're going to be learning. And here's what we're expecting you to talk about in your first one-on-one in your first week. And here's week 2. And so it's driving that accountability balance with managers. The reality is, it takes a village to onboard people. It takes that onboarding buddy that's going to practice with them. It takes the Gong playlist that you're going to listen to show what good looks like at different parts of the sales cycle. It's all of those things, but we can't do it without the managers. They're the inspection. They are they're our ramp accountability partners. Are they hitting the milestones? And if not, then we work together to come up with a coaching plan. So it's a very shared responsibility.
And you just wrapped up a sales kickoff SKO at Sigma Computing, I believe. And it's something I know you've done a bunch of previous roles, iHeartMedia, Algolia, Lattice. Like, can you talk about like what is an SKO? Why are they important? What's the goal of an SKO?
So sales kickoffs, I love them. For me, it's about celebrating what's happened and getting everyone excited for what's ahead, right? We have these big, hairy, audacious goals in SaaS companies. And, we really have to rally behind getting everyone excited about the product roadmap, getting everyone excited and aligned on what our vision is and who we're going to be this year. So it's a mixture of those things, and then it's a mixture of sharing best practices. And so typically, like what we've done at kickoffs is a mixture of that. Sometimes there's enablement, but that's just the start of a journey. I would never want to just do one and done training. It needs to be reinforced throughout the quarter. So my only advice for sales kickoffs is, if you're going to introduce a training theme, it needs to continue to echo throughout the rest of the quarter or the rest of the year.
And what like makes a good SKO, or what does even like the agenda look like? Because I mean, you talk about sales training there, but then I also see like, I feel like LinkedIn used to have their sales kickoff, I feel like in like Las Vegas, and it was like a party. I feel like I would heard about like, so how do you think about kind of like the raw fun experience of a SKO versus like, okay, we're actually going to teach you some stuff?
Yeah, I think it's a balance, right? Because like you don't get to meet everyone from the East Coast or the West Coast all at once throughout the year. It's like the one time to get everyone together. And so you do have to have that network. You do have to have that camaraderie built in. And so, a typical, day of being locked in a ballroom, going through slideware and listening to different speakers is part of it. But then you've also got partner happy hours, and you've got like award nights and all of those things, like the meals and just connecting people and the fun built in. So our recent one was in San Antonio, and we had like a night where we were doing line dancing, and we had a longhorn bull that you could take photos with, and we really embraced the Texas theme this year. It was super fun.
Very fun. And like, do you think more companies should do RKOs, like revenue kickoff, and bring in, customer success and marketing? Is that a trend you're seeing, or how should people think about that?
100%. Our CS team was there. Everyone in go-to-market was actually at it. For some reason, we still called it sales kickoff. But I mean, everyone is selling at some point, right? To sell is human. And, we're all saying the same things, and we're talking to our customers. We're solving their problems. And so, yeah. We had everyone there, and it was a really good time.
Nice. Yeah, the long hard bowl is fun. I'd love to see the whole Sigma computing sales team doing a line dance. That'd be funny.
Oh my God, I don't want to see that. We were like stepping on each other's toes. It was really bad.
That's good. That good team bonding. So you have a wealth of sales enablement experience across so many amazing companies. And I'd love to kind of take a step back and just talk a little about sales enablement more broadly. And like, first, maybe kind of a dumb question is like, how do you even define sales enablement?
Such a good question. I feel like it also, when I talk to other sales enablers, it's like, it's different depending on who you talk to. For me specifically, I know I'm doing my job well if revenue's going up and cost of sale is going down. And I think if RevOps is the process makers and they're driving efficiencies, enablement is the effectiveness that's doing the magic to drive effectiveness. So I think about it in like 3 buckets. I think of it as the first bucket being like having a team that's your business partner, right? And so having someone that's mapped to each segment or each part of the business, and they're really there to listen to what are the problems, what are the themes, what's working, what's not, and kind of communicating about resources or planning training that needs to happen, and building out the accountability with the sales leaders to make sure that that happens. And then there's the platform enablement team, which is your tech stack, your content management solution, your LMS solution, and making sure like that the enablement team is running the same process, has the Lego pieces to build the solution to drive that effectiveness. And then the last piece is program management. So like onboarding is a huge program to build and sustain and to make sure that we're improving ramp quarter over quarter. Same with go-to-market plays. So there's just lots of different levels and paths to enablement.
It's a really helpful framework. And I kind of want to go through each of these things and dive a little bit deeper. Maybe let's start with sales training, because I know that's a big part of it. Like, what makes a great sales training program? And like, how do you think about the balance of live training, either in person or on a Zoom call, or more of like on-demand training? You mentioned like LMS systems where it's like, hey, go watch a bunch of these videos and learn and come back to us. Like, how do you think about kind of what's better?
You know, I've talked to so many salespeople over the years, and not a lot of them love spending hours on an LMS, which doesn't surprise me. Like, they're people. So, you know, I use the LMS as like a primer, and it shouldn't be like more than 8 minutes of their time going through something. And it's to prep them for a live training, you know, giving them a little bit of context before they come to learn a brand new motion or a brand new persona, or a brand new part of the product. So I think about that first from like a on-demand, and then to go into like live training and what good sales training to me looks like is actionable, right? Like if we're meeting in person, it's because they need to practice something. They need to be doing something differently than they have been before. And the best enablement gives them actionable pieces to walk away with. So I can give you an example. You know, we did some embedded analytics training recently at Sigma, and the sales team walked away with a list of accounts that they could go after with brand new messaging that they could use for their outbound. And so that way our managers could be looking at, okay, did they work that account? Did our messaging work? And how many SQLs did we get? That to me is like actually pushing enablement to have a lower bar of entry for the sellers to actually go and do the stuff we want them to go and do. So I try to remove the friction for sellers with sales training.
I love that story. And then do you think like, do you also make people do role playing? And like, if it's a pitch or something like that, is it, hey, here's the pitch, and then role play with your manager and do things like that? Cause I feel like you often do that early on when you first join a company, but do you still make kind of, I don't know, sellers who have been there a while, if there's a new product, do you kind of make them go through that exercise as well?
100%. If it's like something that's really new, I'd rather them be practicing on each other and giving each other feedback and getting coached versus practicing with a prospect, right? We want the prospects to have the best.
Yeah. And do you do like demo certification? I remember we did that at Lattice. It might have been before you were there, but there was, I think we rolled out engagement and like J-Zack sat in a room and was like the scary buyer. And I even was one of them too. And then we had each seller come in and be like, all right, pitch us engagement. And they had to like pass our muster. Like, is that something you think is a good practice when you're rolling out a new product or whatever the topic is?
Yeah, I believe if it's something that they've never done before, like, again, like getting certified, and kind of like, again, having almost like something that they have to go and build up to. So they have to care about it. They have to learn it because it's going to be inspected. It's one way to make sure that they can do the behavior. So I believe in certifications. What I believe in most, though, is you can't be fully certified until you prove that you've done it in the wild. So like, it's all good and well to like get certified internally, but you should also be able to do it and show us that you've done it again and again and again and gone.
Yeah. One of the things I noticed at Lattice was I felt like, I don't know, salespeople in general can only ingest so much new information and change the pitch so much. Like they get so comfortable in kind of their zone and they pitch and they win business that way. But then you introduce a new product or a new persona and it can be hard to kind of change what you've been doing and been successful at. Like, how do you think about that problem? How much can salespeople and just people in general kind of learn and change? Because it could be kind of overwhelming given the amount of change just that's inherent at a lot of startups.
Yeah. My last CRO, he always had this question to me when I'd be like, we should do all of these things. He's like, do you think the field can really absorb that? Like, what other things are we asking them to do right now? And I think it's that healthy balance of being real about how much change we're asking them to adopt. So it's a balance. And I know that's a very nebulous answer, but, like if someone's saying, hey, we've got a brand new sales process that needs to get adopted, the reality is that that's going to take maybe 2-3 quarters to really get adopted. And so if that's the most important thing that we believe is going to impact revenue, then it should be the focus and it should be given the focus for that amount of time so that we can make it into behavior. It takes 68 days for a new behavior to become a habit. So like you really do have to practice it and inspect it for quite some time before it really gets adopted.
Yeah. And I imagine it's also very personal to the rep. I think some reps are very good at change and can quickly adapt on the fly. And then others, it just takes a little bit longer. And that's to some degree just people's different styles and learning styles.
Yeah. Well, and also similar to sales, right? Like when, again, like enablement is internally selling, like if I know that someone's a detractor or a blocker and like I'm not going to be able to get them to adopt something, I go find my champion. I go find that tiger team and I will prove to them with data that this way is the better way. And so like, again, like always be selling.
And you mentioned sales process there. I'm curious, like, do you have a favorite sales methodology? I mean, there's so many that go around: Sandler, Medic, Force, Challenger. Like, how do you pick one that's right for your business?
I've become agnostic because every company has wanted to do a different one. And I also think that there's certain methodologies that are better for different types of businesses. So like if you have a very like high velocity sales motion and, you have sellers that are maybe earlier in their career, like Sandler's really good for the basics and the fundamentals and for that velocity motion. If you've got a really complex sales cycle, you're selling into the enterprise, you probably want to use something like a force management with MedPick. And so, yeah, I've used a lot of them and I've keep them kind of close to my chest at this point because, CROs might want a different one and I want to make sure they stay open-minded.
Yeah. And I think they all work to your point. I mean, it just depends do you believe in it? Do you follow it? Is it the right for whatever segment you're going after? So yeah, that makes sense. Sales enablement I have found is just inherently so cross-functional. You're working with so many different people within the sales org, but then kind of across like the company. Like from your perspective, who are those cross-functional personas that you sort of work with most closely?
So product marketing, for sure. RevOps is my ride or die. And then obviously like all of the managers for the teams that we work with because we can't do without them. So those would probably be like my top cross-functional stakeholders. And if I've forgotten someone, I'm very sorry.
Yeah. And so I'd love to kind of go through each of those. Like, how do you like product marketing? What does that relationship look like? How do you work with the product marketing team?
So right now, we have like a biweekly meeting where we're sharing, like we'll do road mapping together on a quarterly basis to make sure, because the reality is like the work we're trying to do, whether it's a problem we're solving that's being driven from like sales leadership that might need PMM support, or product is launching a new thing that's going to need sales enablement support, our roadmaps overlap. And the same can be said for like our RevOps partners. They might be updating a new process in our systems or our tools. You know, they might have CPQ that they want to update and roll out. So like all of those partners, like we all impact each other's roadmaps. So it's silly to not be like road mapping with them and then kind of like finalizing a forecasted roadmap, because you've always got to be flexible, and getting that sign off. Like, are we working on the right things? Because this is what we're going to hold ourselves accountable to. So that's what PMM and enablement looks like today is, and I like to have the gray between the two teams as well, because if we are aligned on what we're trying to achieve, like we can share the work. Like sometimes there's things at certain companies where it's competitive lands in PMM. Sometimes I've seen it land in enablement, and it doesn't really matter as long as the field is getting what they need to be successful.
Yeah, it's interesting how your sales enablement is sort of caught in the middle between all of these different functions, where I imagine like the PMMs are coming to you like, we got to launch this product, we got to train the sellers. And then RevOps is like, we bought this new software, train them on this. And so it must be so interesting to kind of balance all those different requests at the same time.
Shielding the field is what I call it. Like, you know, is it a revenue impacting thing? And if it's not, we got to say no, or we've got to go back and go, are we working on the right things? Because theoretically, if we're all trying to drive revenue, we should be somewhat aligned. So it's a lot. It's a lot of trade-offs.
And do you try and set up like really clear guardrails of who does what? Like, you know, product marketing always makes the deck for the training, but sales enablement will set up the session and invite the right people. Like, do you try and define those roles and responsibilities very tightly, or do you try and keep it more loose and open-ended depending on the situation?
I try to keep the workflow of a process pretty tight. So like, for example, when we're doing a product market launch, we kind of know whose roles are what in a product market launch. If it's like a go-to-market play, that might look different, but we just align on like, here are the motions we know we're going to work on as teams together. You know, what makes the most sense? Where are our strengths as teams? And kind of define that up front with a good old racy, and then away we go.
Love a good racy.
I know.
And then you mentioned one of the key roles of sales enablement as being just like a business partner, right? To the sales managers, the sales leaders. What does that look like? Are you just constantly meeting with them to kind of figure out what their top competitor they're dealing with or their top issue of the day? How do you kind of go about being a really good business partner to key stakeholders?
Honestly, like if I was doing that, I would be really reactive. And so like my goal is to try to give as much value as I can to a sales manager. So while I want to listen to what they're hearing, I also want to come with insights, and I use data to do that. So like I want them to be aware of problems they may not have even realized they had through data, and then ask them, do we want to solve that because we think it's impactful to do? So I think it's a healthy balance of both. But if it's just us coming to them with, how can we help? How can we help? You become the cleanup crew, and you become the order taker, and you don't become the strategic partner. And I think, you know, there's so much people that fall into the order taker help bucket because they don't know how to use data, or like they don't understand sales math to be more proactive with their sales partners.
Gotcha. So you're like looking at all the sales data, the funnel data, and saying, hey, our close rates are falling off, or these things are in trouble. And then here's some programs and ways we can attack that problem. Yeah.
Using conversational intelligence, that's a huge one for us. Also, like there's a lot of sales funnel math and looking at that. But also just like quantifying pain as well. Like if a sales leader says like, no one knows how to pitch this new success program that you're launching, like I want to go and verify that that's actually a pain. So like I'll go and look at conversations that have been recorded and see how many times it's been mentioned so that I can make sure that it is a true pain or it's not. You'd be amazed at how many things you end up not doing because that's just one person versus an entire field.
I'd love to switch gears and talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, software and sales enablement software. And maybe even do my own product discovery in this part of the conversation. I'm curious, like, if you had like a small budget and it's just like, what are the core sales enablement softwares that you need to buy? You mentioned a few in this conversation: content management, conversational intelligence, learning management. Are those like the big three that you need to purchase as part of building your sales tech stack, or are there others? And how do you think about kind of the core of the sales team?
I could not do a proactive job without conversational intelligence. So that's like always going to be the first thing I go for. The LMS is probably number 2 because that's how I'm going to build scale for my onboarding programs or pre-work or post-work. And although I do think if you were being really scrappy, you could still do like a lightweight LMS for just like libraries in your conversational intelligence tool. CMS is the last one for me. And I'll have to be honest, like I'm at a point where I've bought 3 of them at this stage and I wouldn't buy them again. And I know it's a very controversial thing for me to say as an enablement person who has all of this content that I'm trying to get into the hands of the salespeople at the right time. But I've been yet to find a content management solution that's really solved the problem. Like no seller actually wants to be in another tool. They already have so many. And so like, I just see this big theme in like the enablement space of just like this consolidation of all technology. So it's an interesting trend that I'm seeing and feeling.
And so then where's all the content go? How do sellers find all the stuff product marketing's making? Do you just put it in Google Drive and call it a day, or how do you think about that?
Right now it's in a CMS, but it's a bear to manage because we're such a small team and it's got all the bells and whistles that we don't use. But in the future, we're actually toying with the idea of using our own product to build a content management solution. So that could be an exciting new venture for us as a team. But I think about the amount of content that actually is used during a sales cycle. And, the reality is like all of the slideware that you build for a sales team, like most salespeople use maybe 10 slides during a sales cycle. So do they actually need the 100 slide deck repository? It's just a question that I'm starting to ask more and more.
Yeah. And this is not to plug Doc, but this is how I think about it too, is like, you had this huge library of stuff that you barely use. And I think one thing we have found with Doc, which has been pretty cool, is like you have this actionable template, right? That you can just use from client to client to client. And it's not, it's a subset of the resources. It's not the ones, like the 1,000 in the backlog. So I don't know. That's how I think about it. One thing I always ask myself too is like, why does sales need a separate system for all this stuff? Like, why does all the content and even like learning management, like why can't that just go in the company-wide wiki or the company-wide learning management system? Why does sales need its own dedicated system for that? I'm curious if you have an opinion on that.
I mean, I don't, if I'm being honest. Like I'm starting to realize more and more that I don't know if they do. So it's something I'm still trying to figure out, if I'm being honest. It's I haven't seen it really drive more efficiency or effectiveness for the field by having this like big governed thing where like the reps still want to have agency to like change things and make it more personalized to the conversations they're having. So I don't have a good answer there. I'm sorry.
No, super interesting to hear your perspective on it, even if it's kind of like, I don't know. That's good. Yeah. And I guess, what is sales enablement's role in like buying and purchasing and implementing software? Is it usually RevOps who goes out and buys it, and then you're kind of helping enabling and implementing that process? Are you buying software? Who's kind of doing what within the org in your experience?
It's been different at every single company I've worked at. Like There at Algolia, it was like very much like I had my sales tech budget. Like I got to pick the LMS, I got to pick the CMS, I got to pick the conversational intelligence tools. At Lattice, it was a big partnership between like our L&D team and picking our LMS. Yeah, I think like honestly, I've actually done a lot of the buying in hindsight. At Sigma, like I've walked into a lot of tech that I'm like trying to evaluate if it's the right technology we keep long term. And so like a lot of it is just like, again, going back into discovery mode. What are the reps like? What do they need? What's slowing them down? And just aligning with RevOps on if we've got the right solution in place for them today.
I'd love to switch gears and talk about sales enablement careers. I'm curious from your perspective, like what type of people thrive as a sales enablement person?
I think you have to be like really, really, really organized and okay with a little bit of chaos. It's funny. I think like a lot of people see enablement and they only see the output, which is like the training. They don't see all of like the project management that goes into it, all of the discovery you have to do, all of the content you still have to build in the background, and all of the alignment you have to and buy-in you have to get with your stakeholders. So like, you know, sellers make great enablement people if you're into doing that discovery, but I don't think it's the end all be all. I've had people that have been BDRs that have been amazing sales enablement people. And I also think it depends on what part of enablement, going back to like the 3 pillars that I see, like I think they require different skill sets. I think there's certain teams where you're going to get harder buy-in if you haven't walked in their shoes. Like to go in front of an enterprise sales team and enable them and you haven't done enterprise sales, that's a really tough sell.
And I'm curious, why have you decided to have a career in sales enablement? Like, why do you love sales enablement so much?
Because I'm a sadist. I'm kidding. Honestly, I love problems. I love problems so much. I love making things that are really like unclear, like have that clarity for people. And I love being a mad scientist and going, if we tweak these things, if we give them these assets, does it actually drive the outcome? And I just get fascinated with that process.
I'd love to end today's conversation with kind of a question I'm wondering myself as I scale Doc, and maybe a question for like other founders out there as well, is like, when do you actually bring on a dedicated sales enablement person? Because I'm doing a lot of that sales enablement myself right now. We have like a 3-person sales team. Like at what point in kind of a company's life cycle do you think, all right, it's time to bring on a proper function for sales enablement?
When you feel like you've got product market fit, because that's when you're going to want to go and pour gasoline on the fire, right? And to pour gasoline on the fire, you need someone that's going to help you scale. And typically I find that like enablement gets brought in too late into that journey. And so then they have no time to build. And for those people that fall in that situation, it's the tugboat first before trying to build the cruise ship. So that would be my advice. The moment you feel like I've got product market fit, I'm going to go pour gas on this fire, you need enablement there with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation today, Lish.
Yeah, Alex, likewise. This was fun.
That's a wrap on another episode of Grow and Tell. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe to us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, or find every episode at growandtellshow.com. I'm your host, Alex Krakoff. Thank you for listening.